Hello, my name is Anna-Lena Fredriksson and I work at the Division for Language and Communication at Chalmers. This short video is about how to write an abstract for a report or a paper. We'll look at what an abstract is, its building blocks and functions, and what are good strategies for writing a successful abstract. And we'll also look at a few examples. An abstract can be defined as a self-contained, fairly short statement of a larger work. So it's not a review and it's not an evaluation, for example, but it's an abbreviated representation of the contents of a larger work. Let's look at an example of an abstract so that we get an idea of what it might look like. This shows an abstract from a paper published in an IT journal. It's a quite typical abstract in terms of form, structure and size. It's approximately 200 words and it's written in one paragraph. The components of an abstract may vary according to discipline. So what we'll look at in this video is common in many engineering disciplines, but there may of course be differences both within and across disciplines. I won't go into detail on the structure of this abstract here, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, take a few minutes to think about the following questions. Where do we find abstracts? Why are abstracts such important texts? And who reads an abstract? You can pause the video here for a moment. First then, where do we find abstracts? It's the first running piece of text in many reports. It's placed after the title page, but before the table of contents. We also note that, depending on the type of report, the abstract can be called summary or even executive summary, for example in a company report, but these can also be a bit different from each other. In Swedish, an abstract is usually called abstrakt, sammandrag or sammanfattning. Note that if you have a section in your report, for example the final section, and that's called summary, it's a good idea to call the first piece abstract instead of summary to avoid having two sections called the same thing. And why are abstracts such important texts? Well, we can ask what the function of an abstract is. Think about all the reading you do in a large project, all the papers and the reports that you read. How do you know if the paper is worth reading, if it's useful for you? You read the abstract first of all. So the abstract tells the reader if it's worth the time to read the full paper. This is about selection. Second, abstracts usually contain keywords which are used for indexing. So indexing makes it easy to search for abstracts and papers in online databases. And very often, keywords are also given below the abstract. And the abstract that I showed you a few slides back has these keywords listed below the abstract. Who reads an abstract? Well, we can imagine a wider readership than for the full report or the full paper. Not everyone who reads the abstract will read the full paper. And the reader might not be fully familiar with the topic, which we need to think about when writing. All in all then, we can say that the abstract offers a quick way for the reader to decide if the report is relevant enough to read. It should convince readers that the project is interesting, valuable, and worth investigating further. Then, how can the writer achieve this? There are three key aspects for an effective abstract. First, accuracy. A good abstract includes only information included in the original document. Brevity. A good abstract gets straight to the point, it contains precise language, and it doesn't include unnecessary adjectives. Finally, clarity. A good abstract does not contain jargon or colloquialisms, everyday language, and it always explains any acronyms. This brings us to the structure and components of an abstract. An abstract has a fairly fixed structure. As a reader, we know what to expect. So when we read a report, we want to be told why the report is written, the need or the value of the report, in what way the research is relevant, and in what context it's carried out. And all this is its purpose. We also want to know the framework of the report, what it includes. This is scope. We want to know how you went about it, method. What were your results and what conclusions you could draw. This type is often referred to as an informative abstract, and it's a common type for a strictly structured document such as a research report. But there's also a second abstract type, the indicative abstract. If you're writing an abstract for a study which is not yet finished, for example if you apply for funding for a project or to go to a conference and present your research, you'll probably write an indicative abstract. This one will only give tentative or expected results, or perhaps no results and conclusions at all. So, an abstract aims to briefly describe the content and scope, what the project does. This is the what, the project's objective or goal, why, its research methodology, how, its results, and finally its conclusions or intended results and conclusions. However, we also come across abstracts that don't say anything about method, for example, perhaps if the method's not relevant enough to be included. Let's now look at a few examples. This is the example we looked at briefly before. We'll now see what it contains and how it's structured. Here the different parts are indicated by square brackets and they are color-coded. It starts by presenting the context or situation, that is the bigger picture of the research, and it says that something is lacking, which signals that there is a need for something. Then comes the scope, what the paper does, what it includes. And here it's good to be very explicit and say, for example, this paper proposes or describes or charts or calculates. And this abstract gives a well-developed scope description, which is nicely tied to methodology in the same sentence. The results piece is also clearly signalled by the phrase, our findings suggest. The abstract ends with an evaluation of the method that was used. This second example is taken from a bachelor's thesis written by two engineering students at Chalmers. We can see that it has the same basic structure as the previous example. It starts by giving some background and context, which frames the purpose of the study. This is followed by scope and main issue. And thirdly, the method is outlined and it ends with results and conclusion. I'll end this film with a few final points to remember. Remember that the abstract is a self-contained, independent text, so write it as if it's the only part of your report that will be read, and don't refer to any parts of the report. As we've seen in the examples in this video, the abstract is usually written as 1 or maybe 2 paragraphs, but this may vary across disciplines and text types, so it's best to check what seems to be most common in your discipline. The abstract is usually the very last piece that we write in the report. However, we place it first in the report, that is after the title page but before the table of contents. It's usually not a good idea to copy and paste whole chunks from various parts of the report and try to put that together as one abstract. The abstract usually needs more summarizing than what we do in the report. Avoid long wordy sentences and avoid repetition of words. Avoid heavy terminology. Remember the wider readership. Lastly, when you talk about purpose and objectives, just like you usually don't bring up your own learning objectives or course objectives in the report, don't include them in the abstract. So, for example, don't say, in this course we learned how to, etc. Instead, focus entirely on the investigation that you carried out. Now you can get started writing. But first you should check the guidelines given for your course, and you might also want to have a look at Chalmers Writing Guide. Good luck! Thank you for your attention. See you next time.